90-Day Fiancé versus reality, multicultural marital differences, and mediations. That is our topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast by InstantMediations.com, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube, the Instant Mediations app, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact-dependent. Hey everyone, this is attorney Mac Pierre-Louis, lawyer, mediator, arbitrator, working throughout Florida and Texas.
Hi everybody, my name's Angela Miller, Dr. Angela Miller, and I am a family mediator here in the state of Florida.
Awesome. And so Angela, you are, or Dr. Angela, you are working basically across the whole state of Florida because you're remote and online as well. And so in today's talk, we're talking about something kind of interesting as usual, which is 90-Day Fiancé versus reality, but focusing mainly on the multicultural issues that come up in marriages. We talk a lot about, cross-border relationships and how people sometimes are fiancés first across, the pond. They come to the U.S. and they get married. Or they're married abroad, they come here, and then they have to deal with different dynamics. But sometimes marriages have problems, and sometimes marriages go through divorce. And in the divorce process, people might find themselves sitting at a mediator's office. They might be sitting with you, Angela, or they might be with me. And as mediators and conflict resolution professionals, we're always trying to make sure that we account for differences, for the nuances that matter, the things that impact people's lives, things that many Americans don't really consider or take into consideration, that might swing something in court one way or another, partly because of ignorance and partly because people just don't know any better. But you're here to kind of share with us some tips and tricks of things you need to know and remember when you are dealing with a relationship that is multicultural. So let me share my screen real quick, and we'll start the chat. So you should see it coming up. And first off, before I even get to that, we want to remind people about your website. And your website, of course, is mediationnikon.com. And Nikon is Nikan. And people can check you out there and learn more about you. That if you're listening to this podcast, be sure to check out mediationnikon.com. Now, with regards to 90-Day Fiancé, very popular show. People know it all around the world, really. It's where typically somebody in the U.S. goes overseas and falls in love with somebody in another country. And the goal is to bring the person here on a 90-day, fiancé visa and get married. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But one thing we all agree, it makes for great TV drama. And a lot of people just take out their popcorn and tune in. And so this, though, is a reality TV show. But sometimes some things that are in the show actually happen and come up at our mediation offices. And so, Angela, why don't you take it over? Tell us why is this topic important to you, and what are some cultural marital differences that you think matter that people need to kind of be aware of when we try to help people at the mediation table?
Well, thank you, Matt. The first is when you're traveling to other countries and you're trying to engage in a future with someone, do you even know what dowry is or what it attunes to? And
A dowry and spell that is DOWRY.
RY, yes. And it's kind of like what we would refer to as Americans, oh, you're making a deposit. But it's an assurance, a financial insurance. You're actually showing the family that you are financially stable enough to care for their child or their adult child. And so it is a means of sharing finances, is really what it boils down to. So if that marriage doesn't work, though, do you even know if you have to pay the dowry back?
Mm.
In some countries, you do.
Yeah. What country
And
would you
I
give me
know
examples?
in Africa, there's many different ones, like in Nigeria and places. There's also not only cultural practices, but then there's also tribal
Yeah.
practices and secular practices that go into this, which those practices are deemed laws to them there. But to us, it's just a practice.
Correct.
And so this becomes a huge difference. And on 90 Day Fiancé, you may see that it's approached or discussed, but they don't go deep into what the law says about these things
Yeah.
or once someone comes to the United States, how this dowry then is documented.
Yeah.
What does it mean?
Yeah, I'll add, I have had mediation in Houston, for example, at least a couple where the issue of dowries did come up. And I remember one particular case, it was involving parties who originally got married in Nigeria and now they were doing a US based divorce. And the courts basically, well, we settled the case, so it didn't go to the courts. However,
Mhm.
I remember addressing it or trying to address it in a way that was, let's just say, wouldn't be recognized here in the USA. But that's a good thing about mediation. People can resolve it themselves without having to go and fight it out in public. And what happens in mediation stays in mediation. It's a confidential agreement. And so, yeah, this does come up. Yeah. What other examples other than dowry?
Well, also what the fiance may be inheriting from family that is cultural in the United States may not be recognized as a means of finances at
Mm.
all. And then if they get divorced, there are spouses who want to try to bring that into as this was a financial gain, but in actuality, it was the families and it was never written into, which is why, people frown upon prenuptial agreements. But they might have their riches already in another country that is inherited that isn't even considered here.
Yeah.
So that's another issue.
Yeah. I had a case basically years back where one party was transferring a lot of money overseas to help take care of their family, extended family. It came to be an issue here in the divorce in the US.
Mhm.
But I think it was another cultural issue because in many countries, there's an expectation that you're
Right.
going to take care of your parents and even your in-laws, and there's an expectation that they're not going to go to a nursing home or what some people call a old folks home. They're going to come live with you. Those
Right.
things can strain a marriage here in the US because it's not something that we typically deal with. But this is why people got to go to mediators who are privy and understand these little cultural nuances, because it can make a big deal when you're trying to
Right.
resolve the differences.
And these inherited responsibilities do have a huge impact on your relationship
Yeah.
because it is introducing something new that
Mhm.
you didn't research or take into consideration prior to your marriage.
Correct. What about religion? What would you say? Because that could be a whole hour.
In some religions, things like, I'll give you an example, like in the Philippines and Vatican, you can get divorced in the United States, but there you have to be annulled. So your marriage, your divorce is not even recognized. You have to apply for an annulment in those two locations.
Mm,
And so you could be divorced in the United States, but it's not recognized there. You're still considered married and therefore still have those responsibilities
yeah,
because it is religious.
correct. What about children? Because that then, I mean, if people don't have kids, then you're really just dealing with cultural issues that might impact your property. Because
Right,
once you're not together anymore, then there's nothing anymore that connects you. But if you have a child, then you're still tied until emancipation of the
right.
child. So can you share any insights on multicultural dimensions on if you have a kid together and what expectations that might exist in some other countries. What are your
Sure.
thoughts?
And this also, fortunately, in some states, things are formulated already by law,
Yep.
but that doesn't mean that the person who's participating in it understands it completely. And an example of that is a gentleman who had married an American doctor, and she made about 200% more in income than he did. And so, of course, the state of Florida said that he would pay, for example, like 42% of the child's expenses, and she would pay the remainder. And he was very upset about this. He just didn't understand it because in his culture, he has to pay 51%. It is his child, and therefore he has to pay 51% of the expenses for the child, or he's not recognized as a man.
Mm,
And this was a huge point for him until it was pointed out and explained to him that it's the law based on your financial means, not on your gender and not on your culture. And it is pre calculated. And once he understood that, it was okay, but it wasn't something he was comfortable with. It took some, large amount of persuading to assure him that he had equal rights and responsibilities, but not financially because the finances were so greater. There was a huge difference.
yeah, that's a good one. And these kind of things would come up a lot in Florida or Texas because we live in
Mm,
two very diverse states.
exactly.
Um, so I know in some of the notes you had sent me, you make reference to cultural history regarding biases or pretenses. Terry Morrison's kiss bow or shake hands. Uh, w- Fill me in because I didn't know. Were you referring to what? Give me tell the audience what are you referring to?
Okay. For example, in China, when women CEO travel there, men are not going to shake their hands. You do not shake hands of the opposite gender. So, women who are CEOs travel with a male companion to attend business meetings with them. And so, this to us, we would take as an insult. But there, it is practice. You don't do that. There's also things like, in the Middle East, there's hand gestures that you would not use because those are considered derogatory. And so you have to know these things before you go. In Japan, you don't shake with two hands. When we really like somebody, we will shake their hands, that
Yeah,
double grip. You don't do that. It's a light handshake just to greet. So even something greeting, and that's what Terry Morrison's book is about is, do I shake their hand? Do I talk to them eye to eye? Do I, bow? What do you do? And it's about legal professionals not knowing these things and
yeah,
not taking time to learn these things before they take on clients
yeah.
because you unknowingly may insult your client and then you're asking them in the same breath to trust you.
Correct. And if you are a mediation and the mediator is completely clueless about it as well, you may knowingly again cause offense without even realizing it. So,
Right.
in your experience, what would be the just a typical common occurrence that you might see in any mediator's office around the country in a typical, let's say, American small town? Okay, you have a mediator office, you got a mediator who has two people coming to see him or her, and they're multicultural backgrounds, meaning they're from two different countries, probably with different traditions. At one point in time, they were in love. They might have a child together, but now things are different, and they're going through a separation, maybe with custody issues or
Mm.
maybe a divorce. What have you seen is like the most common typical thing that we then the mediators, the professionals might mess up and not account for that actually could be a big deal and you want people to remember?
Looking away when they're speaking. Looking away in many cultures means you're not paying attention, even though they're talking and you, oh, excuse me, and you're doing something else.
Yeah.
We have a tendency, because we're aggressively busy, to try to do two or three things at once.
Hmm.
But in actuality, in many cultures, that
Yeah.
is a big no no,
Hmm.
because that means that you are not paying attention to them.
Yeah.
But then in the same turn, I heard an attorney one time complaining about a woman who wouldn't look at him when he was talking. Well, I said, "What country is she from?" And he said, "Oh, she's from Japan." Well, that's actually a respect of authority. And so we have a lot of Asian. I mean, it's a very common um, cultural
Yeah.
exchange in marriage with many Asian backgrounds. And so that is something, is that to look down, not to question your authority, but they're not ignoring you. And they're also not being rude at the same time. It's knowing
Yeah.
these things. In some Asian cultures, they do hi, hi, which means I'm following, I'm listening,
Yeah.
and you may take it as being disruptive or rude, or not understand what the gesture means.
Yeah. Like that in India, for example.
Yes.
I've heard that as well. Yeah, and so these nuances, they matter. Um, I when I moved to Houston and I started doing just legal work, I remember a lot of times people, even people older than me who were referencing me as a lawyer, would sometimes just say Mr. Mac. Okay,
Mhm.
it always sounded odd to me because I remember thinking, why don't they just say Mr. Pierre Louis or just call me Mac? But they always say Mr. Mac, and over time I realized this was mainly from what I saw in Hispanic culture or the Black American culture. So that what was an interesting little tidbit I took away, that this is a sign of respect. Um,
Mhm.
but it's not. You might not think it's formal, okay? But just adding Mister with a first name, it's different, but it's a sign of deference, and so now I understand it. But just little things like that. So anyway, a few minutes left. Tell us why, personally, where does this background come from, as to why you know so much about multicultural issues, and how has that impacted your everyday job helping people work out their differences?
I have been blessed with an adult life overseas teaching, and I've taught at military installations and I've taught at embassies. And so I could have three American children in one class and 36 other cultures. And so picking up from them what are general practices and what is acceptable and isn't acceptable, and plus living abroad. Every time you transition, even if you fly north or you fly west, there's different practice. Well, that's the same is true for every country you enter. For goodness sake, take a few minutes and study what their general practices are.
Yeah.
So just wanting to know so that you could be a good fit in and not stand out as a non knowledgeable American
Yeah.
is so important. And so for me, it was important that I would be able to meet the needs not only of my students, but also to respect their parents. And
Yeah.
so every country is different, and every culture is different. So I had to transition with each and be able to turn it off and on as needed.
Yeah. And so, Ty Bordoni, who we both know, one phrase he likes to use is the concept of, he becomes like the party he's mediating with. So
Mhm.
he flows like water to try to, make them feel comfortable so they can,
Exactly.
I guess, see that he identifies with them. And so that's the job of every professional who's trying to do this conflict resolution work. If we're trying to help somebody resolve a problem, then they have to trust us. They have to feel that we get it, we're listening, we're empathetic, and we're able to experience their pain, experience their frustration from their culture perspective. They
Right.
don't see us as just another person who's in a suit and tie and doesn't get it. Okay, because certainly the resolution that we end up typing up for them as scriveners, and they end up reviewing to sign, might not be something that they actually put their heart into. It might be something that, oh, that's just expected, in this country.
Exactly.
This is how the game is played. These are the customs and the traditions of America, and it doesn't take into account my actual beliefs, my history, my background, my family. So
Right.
so
And
we
they
can,
matter.
no,
Their life
absolutely.
matters.
Exactly. And so multiculturalism, it's something that will happen to every media
Mhm.
eventually, because we're going to run into something, right, that is different. um and so I guess what will be the tip to mediators out there, before the mediation? What should they do if they know that they
I
have?
there are so many helpful websites out there to just know general practices in greeting, pronunciations of names. That's a big one.
That's a
Like you
big one.
said, Mr. Mac.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Yeah.
at least be able to greet your client
Yeah.
with the proper pronunciation of their name.
Yeah.
Um, know a little bit about their culture.
Yeah.
Just a few things,
What if you make
you
a mistake? What if you are in error? Do you think is it forgiven? Or do you think most people would just appreciate that you took the time?
I think acknowledging them and asking them, is this correct? If did I say this correctly? Is this, did I read this correctly? Asking, involve them. As much as they want to resolve their issue, they also want you to understand them.
Correct. I agree.
Mhm.
All right, Dr. Angela Miller. Okay, until next time, we're gonna wrap up, but we'll continue this conversation because you always have so much to say whenever it comes to multicultural issues. And make sure you check out Angela's website,
Thank you.
mediationicon.com. Okay, guys, until next time, take care.